He wasn't looking for anything that morning, until a faint sound came from a snow-buried wooden shed. Beneath the frozen layers, a large, starving dog was barely alive. And beside it, a truth that made everything more complicated. A Navy SEAL who had survived war, but was slowly losing the battle against his own memories. He thought he was saving a life, but the dog began leading him toward something strange, as if it had all been meant to happen. And when night fell, a shadow appeared, making him realize this was never just a rescue.
His vitals look
Before
good
we
this
begin,
morning, and the
tell me
incision
where
site
you're
is
watching
clean.
from.
We
And don't
anticipate
forget
a
to
full
like
recovery.
and subscribe.
when can we
Help
start?
us reach 1,000 followers so we can continue creating meaningful stories. Now, let's begin the story. The valley had a way of looking honest from a distance. Snow laid itself across the land in smooth, deliberate folds, softening every sharp edge, hiding every fracture beneath a quiet, white promise. Pine trees stood tall and unmoving, their branches heavy with powder, as if even the wind had learned not to disturb them too much. The sky above was pale, washed clean by the cold, the kind of sky people called peaceful when they had never had to survive inside it. Adrian Cross drove through that stillness in a truck that had long ago stopped trying to look impressive. The engine rattled in a familiar rhythm, a low mechanical murmur that matched the steady, controlled pace of the man behind the wheel. Adrian sat upright, one hand resting loosely on the steering wheel, the other near the gear shift, not tense but never relaxed either. And he was a man built from habits that did not fade, 35 years old, 6 feet tall, maybe a little more. His frame was lean and compact, strength worn close to the bone rather than displayed. His face was clean-shaven, always clean-shaven, revealing a square jaw and defined cheekbones that gave him a permanently sharpened look. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, though slightly longer than regulation, as if he had stepped away from that life, but not far enough to forget it entirely. His skin was fair, but the northern wind had left its mark faint roughness along the cheekbones, a subtle weathering that came from long hours outside rather than age. His eyes were the most telling thing about him. Gray-blue, steady, observant. They did not judge, but they remembered. Adrian slowed the truck as the road narrowed, tires crunching softly over packed snow. He knew this stretch well. A ranch gate had frozen shut 2 days earlier, and the owner had called him out to take a look. It was the kind of job that required hands, not decisions. He preferred those. Things that could be fixed with tools were easier than things that required choosing. The wind moved low across the ground, dragging thin ribbons of snow along the surface. It hissed faintly against the truck's frame, a sound so constant it almost became silence. Almost. Adrian drove another 20 yards before his grip on the wheel tightened just slightly. He didn't stop right away. Men like him didn't react to uncertainty without proof. But something had slipped through the edges of that steady world, something that did not belong to wind or engine or memory. A sound. Faint. Broken. Almost swallowed by the cold the moment it existed. He exhaled slowly through his nose and kept driving. 5 more yards. 10. Then he stopped. The truck idled in place, its low vibration humming beneath him. Adrian stared ahead at the empty stretch of road, jaw set, as if the answer might appear if he simply waited long enough. Nothing came. The wind shifted. Snow lifted. Settled again. Silence. He almost reached for the gear shift. Then it came again. Not louder. Not clearer. Just enough. A thin, torn, sound-like breath dragged over something that didn't have the strength to hold it. Adrian closed his eyes once. That was the problem with sounds like that. They didn't ask permission. They simply existed, and once you heard them, they did not leave. He put the truck into reverse. The tires crunched backward through the snow, slow and deliberate, until the old cabin came into view off the side of the road. It leaned slightly to one side, a weather-beaten structure with peeling paint and a porch that sagged under the weight of too many winters. A for sale sign stood half-buried nearby, tilted at an angle, as if it had given up trying to be noticed. Adrian killed the engine. The sudden quiet pressed in. For a moment, he just sat there, hands still on the wheel. There was a time when he would have moved immediately. Checked angles, cleared corners, assessed risk. Now he measured something else. Whether this was worth stepping into. The wind shifted again, and the sound came a third time. Closer. Weaker. Not memory. Not imagination. Adrian opened the door. Cold air hit him hard and immediate, biting through fabric, filling his lungs with a sharp, clean sting. Snow crunched under his boots as he stepped down, each footfall deliberate, controlled. The yard behind the cabin was uneven, partially buried under drifting snow. A birch tree stood off to one side, its pale bark stark against the white, branches stripped nearly bare. At first, Adrian saw nothing. Just shape, shadow, the usual geometry of abandonment. Then his gaze caught something out of place. A line. Not natural. A faint ridge beneath the snow, too straight, too contained. He moved toward it. Each step pushed a soft squeal from the snow beneath his boots. The wind tugged at his jacket, pressing cold fingers through seams and fabric, but he barely noticed. He crouched, brushed the surface with his glove. Wood. The edge of something buried. Adrian paused for half a second, his hand resting against the cold surface. Then he started digging. Not fast, not frantic, methodical. Snow fell away in small, controlled movements, revealing more of the structure beneath. A slanted roof, rough boards, a narrow frame, a wooden kennel, half buried, almost sealed. Adrian's jaw tightened. He cleared the top, fingers moving with steady precision despite the cold creeping into them. The latch was stiff, ice clinging to the metal, resisting. He worked it loose. The hinge gave with a dull, reluctant creak. Adrian lifted the lid. For a fraction of a second, he thought it was empty, just darkness and packed snow. Then something inside moved. Not a full motion, not even a struggle. Just a shift. A small, and almost imperceptible adjustment of weight, like something deciding whether it was still worth reacting. And in that tiny movement, something inside Adrian's chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Because he had seen that before. Not in a dog. In a man. A man who had still been alive when Adrian reached him, but not alive enough to stay. Adrian leaned closer. Inside the kennel lay a German shepherd. Not young. Not a puppy. A full-grown dog, maybe 5 years old, though it was hard to tell beneath the state it was in. Its coat, once thick and strong, was now matted and clumped with ice, the natural sable pattern dulled beneath dirt and neglect. Cream, gray, and black fur tangled together in uneven patches, some areas worn thin enough that the skin beneath showed through. It was too still, too thin. Ribs pressed visibly against its sides, each shallow breath lifting them in a weak, uneven rhythm. Its body was curled tightly in on itself, as if trying to conserve whatever heat remained. A short length of chain ran from a collar at its neck to a metal ring embedded in the wood. Too short. Not enough room to move properly. Not enough room to survive. There was a bowl near its front paws, frozen solid. Another, overturned and half buried. Adrian's eyes flicked over the details quickly, automatically, the way they always had. Assessment, condition, time, not a week. The body wouldn't have held that long without water, but long enough. Too long. The dog's ear twitched. Then, slowly, its eyes opened. Dark, clouded slightly at the edges, but aware. It didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't try to pull away from the chain. It just looked at him. Not with trust, not with fear, with something far quieter, recognition of presence, as if it had already decided that whether this shape in the light meant help or harm, and it didn't have the strength to argue either way. Adrian swallowed once, the motion subtle, almost imperceptible. The dog tried to move, its head lifted barely. Its front legs trembled as it attempted to push itself up. It got halfway, then collapsed back down, the effort too much. A small sound escaped it, not quite a whimper, more like breath catching on something inside its chest. Adrian's hand tightened slightly against the edge of the kennel. There it was again. That moment, the one where time narrowed, where everything reduced to a single, simple truth. You are here, and something else is still alive. He had stood in that moment before, in a room that smelled of smoke and blood and heat. He had reached someone then, too. Too late. Adrian exhaled slowly. The cold air burned on the way out. No, he muttered under his breath, the word rough from disuse. Not this time. He reached down, fingers moving toward the chain. The metal was stiff with ice, or frozen into place where it looped through the collar. It resisted his first attempt to move it. He didn't rush, didn't force it. Just adjusted his grip, steady, controlled, the way he had been trained to handle things that broke if pushed too hard. The latch shifted. A small click. The chain loosened. The dog didn't react, didn't even flinch. That, more than anything, told Adrian how close it was to the edge. He slipped one arm beneath the dog's body. It weighed almost nothing. That was wrong. A dog that size should have had weight, presence, resistance. This one felt like something already halfway gone. Its head fell against his wrist as he lifted it, breath warm and faint against the fabric of his sleeve. Up close, Adrian could see the details more clearly, the dullness in the fur, the slight crusting at the edges of the eyes, the way the chest moved too fast, too shallow. Still fighting. Somehow. Adrian stood, holding it carefully against his chest, adjusting his grip so the fragile body was supported fully. The wind pressed against his back, colder now that his hands were occupied. The yard looked the same as it had moments before. Snow, trees, silence. Nothing in the world had changed. Except this. He turned toward the truck. Each step deliberate, measured, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving. For the first time in a long while, Adrian Cross was no longer driving to pass time. He was carrying something that needed him to arrive. The truck heater struggled. It pushed out uneven waves of warmth that never quite reached the edges of the cab, leaving pockets of cold that clung stubbornly to the windows and floorboards. Frost crept along the inside corners of the windshield, thin and delicate like something alive, something patient. Adrian Cross drove with one hand steady on the wheel. The other stayed close, not touching, but close enough. The German Shepherd lay on the passenger seat, wrapped in a heavy coat that smelled faintly of motor oil and cold iron. The fabric rose and fell in shallow, uneven motions. Each breath came with a faint hitch, a quiet resistance somewhere deep in the chest. Adrian didn't look over every second. He didn't need to. He could hear it. The rhythm. Too fast, too light. Still there. That was enough. For now. And he adjusted the heat dial slightly higher, even though he knew it wouldn't make much difference. The truck was old. It did what it could, and no more. No. That, in a way, made sense to him. He had built his life around things that did exactly that. The road stretched ahead, pale and narrow under the winter sky. Snowbanks rose on either side, shaping the path into something closer to a corridor than a road. Contained. Predictable. Adrian preferred it that way. He drove faster than usual. Not reckless. Just without hesitation. For years, hesitation had been his default. Every decision weighed, measured, filtered through memory before it became action. Now there was no room for that. Not with something breathing beside him that might not continue to do so. The dog shifted. A small movement. Its head rolled slightly toward him, pressing weakly against the fold of the coat. The muzzle brushed the edge of his sleeve, searching instinctively for warmth, for something steady. Adrian's jaw tightened. He reached over, just once, adjusting the coat more securely around the body, tucking it beneath the dog's chest to trap what little heat it had left. The fur beneath his fingers was colder than it should have been. Too thin. Too damp. "Stay with it," he muttered, voice low. Rough. He didn't know if he was speaking to the dog, or himself. The outskirts of town came into view slowly, buildings emerging from the white-like shapes remembered rather than seen. Silver Pines was the kind of place that did not announce itself. It simply appeared when you were already inside it. Small. Functional. Unapologetically quiet. Adrian turned onto Main Street, tires crunching over packed snow and gravel. The few cars parked along the road were dusted with fresh powder, their owners likely inside, avoiding the cold unless necessary. And he pulled into a narrow lot beside a modest white building with a wooden sign that creaked softly in the wind, Maple Ridge Animal Care. The place had been there for years. He had never gone inside. Adrian killed the engine. The sudden silence pressed in again, broken only by the faint ticking of cooling metal. He looked over. The dog's breathing had worsened. Not dramatically, but enough. Each inhale now dragged slightly, a wet sound beneath it, subtle but unmistakable. Adrian opened the door without thinking. Cold air rushed in, sharp and immediate, but he barely registered it as he slid one arm beneath the dog's body. It didn't resist. Didn't even react. That scared him more than anything else so far. He lifted it carefully, supporting the weight, or what little there was of it, against his chest. The head lolled slightly, then settled just beneath his collarbone, as if drawn there by instinct. The warmth of the animal, faint as it was, pressed through the fabric. Alive. Still alive. Adrian pushed the clinic door open with his shoulder. A bell chimed overhead. Warmth hit him first. Not just heat, but a different kind of air. It smelled of antiseptic, wet fur, stale coffee, and something else. Something steady. Something that came from a place used to holding fragile things together. A woman behind the counter looked up immediately. Dr. Elena Ward did not waste time on surprise. She was in her early 40s, tall, with a lean, controlled frame that suggested efficiency over comfort. Her dark brown hair was tied back low at the nape of her neck, though a few strands had escaped, curling slightly from the humidity of the room. Her face was narrow, defined by high cheekbones and a firm mouth that rarely softened unless necessary. Her eyes were gray-green, sharp, observant. They moved once over Adrian quick, assessing, then settled on what he carried. Everything about her posture changed. "What happened?" she asked, already moving. Adrian stepped forward. Found him. Outside town, chained. That was all. It was enough. Elena didn't respond with sympathy. She responded with motion. Treatment room. Now. Another voice came from the back. A young man appeared through a swinging door, already pulling on gloves. Wes Carter moved with a kind of restless energy that hadn't yet been worn down by years. Mid-20s, tall but not fully filled out, with sandy brown hair that stuck up slightly at the front as if it refused to be disciplined. His face was open, expressive in a way that made it easy to read him. Too easy, maybe. His blue hoodie was partially hidden under a worn work jacket, sleeves rolled just enough to show he had been working before this interruption. He saw the dog, and his expression changed instantly. "Oh man," he breathed, stepping closer. No theatrics, just genuine reaction. Elena didn't slow. Table, warm towels, oxygen ready. They moved fast, but not chaotically. That was the difference Adrian noticed immediately. That in the past he had seen people rush. Rush meant mistakes. This was not rushing. This was precision at speed. They cleared a metal table under bright overhead lights. Elena guided Adrian forward with a hand gesture that expected compliance. He set the dog down carefully. Without the coat, it looked smaller, more fragile, the ribs more pronounced, the breathing more alarming. Elena's hands were already moving, checking pulse, lifting an eyelid, pressing lightly along the chest. Her touch was firm, confident. "Severe hypothermia," she said, mostly to herself. "Dehydration. Malnutrition." She paused, listening to the chest longer. Her jaw tightened. "Lung involvement." Wes worked beside her, wrapping warm towels around the dog's body, careful not to apply too much heat too quickly. His hands were steady despite the tension in his face. "IV?" he asked. "If we can get a line." Adrian stood at the edge of the table. Still, hands at his sides. Not interfering, but not leaving either. He watched everything. Every movement. Every small change. The dog made a weak sound, barely audible. Its paw twitched once against the metal surface, then stilled again. Elena glanced up at Adrian. Not for long, just enough. "Name?" she asked. Adrian blinked once. For a moment, the question didn't make sense. Then it did. He looked down at the dog, at the thin frame, the stubborn, failing breath, the fact that it had not died. Not yet. "Ranger," he said. The word felt right, hard-edged, surviving. Elena nodded once and returned to work. As Wes adjusted the oxygen mask over the dog's muzzle, Ranger's eyes opened again, just slightly, clouded, fever-dulled, but aware. They didn't search the room, didn't follow the movement of hands or light. They fixed on one thing: Adrian. Through plastic, through noise, through the confusion of pain and cold, the dog held that gaze. Not pleading, not afraid. Choosing. And for a brief, disorienting second, Adrian felt something shift in his chest. Something unfamiliar, something dangerous in its own quiet way. Because that look wasn't asking for help. It was placing trust. And he wasn't sure he knew what to do with that. "Stay with me," Wes murmured, almost unconsciously, as he secured the line into the dog's leg. "Come on, buddy." Elena didn't speak again for several seconds. Then she exhaled. "He's critical." Adrian nodded once. He had already known that. "He might not make it through the night." That landed differently. Not because it was surprising. Because it was said plainly. No cushioning. No false certainty. Adrian appreciated that. "What do you need?" he asked. Elena looked at him again, properly this time. Measuring. Not just his words. Him. "Fluids, oxygen, antibiotics, monitoring, time." She paused. And payment. There it was. Reality. While Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the cash he had folded bills from recent jobs. He set them on the counter without counting. Elena didn't look down. That won't cover it. I'll get the rest. How? Adrian held her gaze. I'll get it. There was no challenge in his voice, no defensiveness, just statement. Elena studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once. Then we treat him. Wes exhaled softly, relief flickering across his face before he focused again on the work. They moved Ranger into an oxygen enclosure, adjusting settings, securing lines, stabilizing what they could. Time stretched. Not fast, not slow. Just stretched. Machines hummed quietly. The clinic settled into a different rhythm, one built around waiting. Adrian sat in a chair a few feet away, close enough to see, far enough not to interfere. He didn't check his phone, didn't move much, just watched, counted breaths, listened. The sound of Ranger's breathing began to change, not stronger, but less frantic, slightly deeper, slightly more controlled. It wasn't improvement. Not yet. But it wasn't decline either, and in that space between worse and better something held. Sometime later, Elena stepped beside him. He's still not safe, she said. Adrian nodded. I know. She crossed her arms, studying the enclosure. You could have kept driving. He didn't answer immediately. The question hung there, not accusatory, just present. After a moment, he spoke. I've done that before. Elena glanced at him. Didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. Outside, the wind shifted again, snow tapping softly against the windows. Inside, a dog fought to stay alive. And a man who had once believed survival was the only thing left to him sat quietly, discovering without quite realizing it that sometimes survival wasn't meant to be done alone. Night settled over Silver Pines without ceremony. It didn't fall. It tightened. The sky dimmed into a deep, iron blue, and the snow outside the clinic windows began to reflect the artificial light in a way that made everything look colder than it already was. The wind had picked up again, dragging long, whispering currents of powder across the street. Inside Maple Ridge Animal Care, time moved differently. Slower, measured in breaths. Adrian Cross sat in the same chair he had taken hours earlier, his elbows resting lightly on his knees, hands loosely clasped. He hadn't moved much. Not because he was tired, but because moving felt unnecessary. The oxygen enclosure hummed quietly a few feet away. Inside it, Ranger lay still. Not the same kind of stillness as before. This one had weight to it, and the rise and fall of his chest had deepened slightly, though each breath still carried that faint, wet resistance beneath it. His body was wrapped in controlled warmth now, no longer fighting the brutal cold of the outside world, but something else instead. Survival, Adrian thought, didn't always get easier once you were inside. Sometimes it just changed opponents. He leaned back slightly, the plastic chair creaking under the shift. His eyes stayed on the enclosure, tracking every subtle movement, every small sign that Ranger was still choosing to stay. The clinic had quieted. Not empty, never empty, but quieter. Somewhere in the back, a cat let out an annoyed yowl, followed by the soft murmur of someone trying to calm it. Metal clinked faintly. A machine beeped once, then settled again. Life continuing. Even here. Even now. Wes Carter passed by carrying a stack of folded towels, his movements slower than before, but still purposeful. But he glanced at Adrian as he walked past, hesitating for just a fraction of a second before speaking. "You still here?" It wasn't really a question. Adrian nodded once. Wes shifted his weight slightly, as if unsure what to do with that information. "Most people don't stay," he said after a moment. "Not like this." Adrian didn't respond immediately. Most people hadn't stood where he had stood before. Most people hadn't learned what it meant to arrive too late. "That dog doesn't have most people," he said finally. Wes studied him for a second, then gave a small nod, as if filing that answer somewhere. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Guess he doesn't." He moved on. Adrian watched him go for a moment before returning his attention to Ranger. The dog hadn't moved much, but something about him had changed. Not physically. Something subtler. There was less distance in the way he lay there. Less like he was slipping away. More like he was holding. Adrian exhaled slowly, and he didn't trust improvements that came too quickly, but he noticed them. Always. Time passed in small increments. 10 minutes? 20? An hour. Elena Ward moved in and out of the treatment area with the same controlled efficiency she had shown from the start. She checked vitals, adjusted fluids, listened to Ranger's chest again and again, each time with the same focused intensity. She didn't speak much. Didn't need to. Everything she did had purpose. At one point, she paused beside Adrian again, arms folded loosely across her chest as she watched the dog. "He's stabilizing," she said. Not optimism. Not relief. Just fact. Adrian nodded. "How long before we know?" he asked. Elena considered that for a moment. "Morning," she said. "If he makes it that far, his chances improve." If. The word hung in the air. Adrian didn't react to it outwardly, but something in his posture shifted, just slightly. He leaned forward again, elbows returning to his knees, on eyes fixed on Ranger, as if watching alone could influence the outcome. Elena studied him briefly, then turned away. She had seen men like him before. Not the same stories, not the same scars, but the same kind of stillness, the kind that came from carrying something too long. Somewhere past midnight, the clinic grew even quieter. The lights dimmed slightly in the outer areas, though the treatment room remained bright. The world outside had disappeared into darkness, leaving only the reflection of the interior on the glass. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to reset. And memory came anyway. Not clearly, not in full images. Just fragments. Heat. Noise. A voice that had stopped too suddenly. The weight of something he couldn't carry fast enough. His eyes opened again instantly. The oxygen hiss pulled him back. The present reassembled itself around him. The clinic, the light, the dog, Ranger, still there, still breathing. Adrian stood slowly, moving closer to the enclosure. Not touching. Just closer. He could see more detail now. The slight tremor in Ranger's flank, the faint twitch of one ear, the way his nose pressed lightly against the inside of the mask, as if adjusting to the flow of air. Alive. Still. Alive. Ranger's eyes opened again. Wider this time. Not fully clear, but more aware. He didn't look around the room, didn't react to the light or the sound. His gaze went straight to Adrian, and then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, his tail moved. Just once, a weak, barely there motion against the bedding. But it was intentional. A signal. Not of strength, not of recovery, of recognition. And in that small, fragile movement, something inside Adrian shifted in a way he hadn't prepared for. Because that wasn't survival. That was connection. And connection meant responsibility. Adrian stood there longer than he realized, long enough that Wes noticed. Did he just— Yeah, Adrian said quietly. Wes let out a soft breath, something like disbelief mixed with hope. Well, that's new, he murmured. Elena stepped in moments later, having caught the change in tone. What happened? He responded, Wes said. To him. Elena's gaze flicked between Adrian and Ranger. She didn't smile, but something in her expression softened, just slightly. That's a good sign, she said. Then, after a pause, more quietly, dogs don't waste energy on the wrong things when they're that weak. Adrian absorbed that without comment. He understood what she meant. Instinct. Focus. Choosing where to spend what little you had left. He had done the same once, spent everything on something that hadn't been enough. Elena moved closer to the enclosure, checking Ranger again, listening to his lungs with a practiced ear. Still critical, she said, but fighting. Wes nodded, almost to himself. Mean little guy, he said softly. Doesn't know when to quit. Adrian's mouth twitched, just slightly. Not quite a smile, but close enough to matter. The hours stretched again, slow, deliberate. At some point, Wes brought over a cup of coffee and set it near Adrian without a word. The liquid had gone lukewarm by the time Adrian remembered it was there. He drank it anyway. Not for the taste. For the motion. For something to do with his hands. Outside, the storm shifted again. Snow began to fall more steadily now, soft flakes tapping against the windows in a quiet, persistent rhythm. Inside, Ranger's breathing changed again. Not dramatically, but enough. Each inhale seemed to go a little deeper, each exhale less strained. Elena noticed immediately. She stepped closer, listening again. Longer this time. Then she straightened. He made it through the worst of the cold shock, she said. Wes let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like relief. Adrian didn't move, didn't react. But something inside him eased. Not fully. Not enough to trust. But enough. Enough for the edge to dull. He sat back down, slower this time, his posture less rigid than before. For the first time since entering the clinic, he allowed himself to look away from Ranger, just for a moment. The room, the light, the people. This place that held fragile things together when they should have fallen apart. It felt unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. Elena watched him from across the room. You planning to leave? She asked. Adrian shook his head once. No. She nodded, as if she had expected that. Then you'll be here in the morning when we reassess. Yes. A simple exchange. But it settled something. Time continued. Eventually, Ranger's eyes closed again. This time not from collapse, from exhaustion. A different kind. The kind that came after choosing to stay. Adrian leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the enclosure once more. He didn't think about tomorrow. Didn't think about cost. Or consequence, or what came after. He thought about one thing. This moment. This fragile, stubborn life that had refused to end in a frozen kennel. And the fact that for reasons he didn't fully understand yet, it had chosen him. Not the cold, not the dark. Him. And that meant something, even if he didn't know what yet. Morning came without warmth. It arrived in silver pines as a pale, reluctant light that pressed itself against the clinic windows, thin and uncertain, as if even the sun wasn't fully convinced it should return. The storm had passed some time before dawn, leaving behind a world that looked untouched, but felt different in ways that were harder to name. Inside Maple Ridge Animal Care, the air held that quiet exhaustion that followed a long night. Machines still hummed, lights still burned. Life continued, but slower now, as if everything needed a moment to remember how. Adrian Cross had not slept. Not really. He had closed his eyes once or twice, head leaning back against the wall, but his body never let go. Years of training and years of something else kept him suspended just beneath rest, always ready to return to awareness. And he was already awake when Elena Ward stepped back into the treatment area. She looked the same as she had the night before. And not. Her hair, still tied low at the nape, had loosened slightly, a few more strands escaping around her temples. The sharp lines of her face remained unchanged, but there was a subtle heaviness beneath her eyes now. Fatigue worn quietly, not displayed. She carried a clipboard in one hand, flipping through it as she walked, her movements efficient even through exhaustion. Adrian straightened slightly in his chair. Elena didn't speak right away. She moved to the oxygen enclosure first. Listened. Watched. Measured. Silence stretched for several seconds, long enough that Adrian felt the weight of it pressing in, shaping the moment into something that mattered. Finally, she exhaled. He made it through the night. Not relief, not celebration, just fact, but it landed differently than anything else she had said so far. Adrian nodded once. His shoulders shifted barely, but enough that the tension he had been holding loosened just a fraction. Elena adjusted the settings on the enclosure, then looked at him. He's not stable, she added, but he's not declining either. That was the closest thing to good news he was going to get. He accepted it the same way he accepted everything else. Quietly. Wes Carter appeared a moment later, carrying a tray with fresh supplies. He looked worse than Elena less practiced at hiding fatigue, more open about it. His eyes were slightly red, his movements a touch slower than usual, but the moment he glanced at Ranger, something sharpened in his expression again. "Morning," he said, voice rough but steady. Adrian nodded in return. Wes set the tray down, glancing between Elena and the enclosure. "So?" he asked. "He held," Elena replied. Wes let out a breath, relief flickering openly across his face. "Stubborn," he muttered, almost fondly. I like him." Adrian's gaze remained on Ranger. The dog looked different in the morning light, still thin, still fragile, but present, more present. More. The harsh edge of crisis had dulled slightly, replaced by something quieter. The breathing, while still uneven, no longer sounded like it was fighting for every inch. It was holding ground. That mattered. Elena moved closer again, checking vitals, her fingers precise and unhesitating. "He'll need to stay," she said without looking at Adrian. "Several days at least, maybe longer." Adrian didn't hesitate. "Then he stays." Elena paused, just briefly. Then she turned to face him fully. "You understand what that means?" she asked. Adrian met her gaze. "Yes." "No, you understand the idea of it," she corrected. "I mean the reality. Cost, time, responsibility." There was no accusation in her tone, just clarity. Adrian didn't look away. "I said I'd cover it." Elena studied him for a moment, as if weighing not just the words, but the man behind them. Then she nodded once. "Then we proceed." Wes glanced between them. something like curiosity flickering in his expression, but he didn't interrupt. The morning moved forward, slowly, deliberately. Ranger slept again for long stretches, his body still too weak to do much else. When he woke, it was brief, small adjustments, slight shifts, a faint twitch of an ear or paw before exhaustion pulled him back under. Adrian stayed, not always standing, not always watching directly, but always there. At one point, Wes brought over a sandwich, setting it beside him with a casualness that felt practiced. "You should eat," he said. Adrian looked at it, then at him. "I'm fine." Wes shrugged. "Yeah, that's what everyone says right before they pass out and make my job harder." There was no edge to it, just honesty. Adrian picked up the sandwich. A small concession. He ate half. Well, that was enough. Time stretched again, shaped by routine now rather than urgency. Check vitals, adjust fluids, listen, wait. It was different from the night. Less sharp, but no less important. Elena moved through it all with the same steady control, though Adrian began to notice the small things, the way she leaned slightly more against surfaces when she paused, the fraction of a second longer she took before speaking. Fatigue. Managed. Not ignored. It happened late in the morning. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Ranger stirred again, more noticeably this time. His head lifted. Not far. Just enough to clear the bedding. His eyes opened, clearer than before, though still shadowed by exhaustion. He looked around the enclosure slowly, as if the world had changed while he slept. And then he tried to stand. The movement was weak, uncoordinated, his legs trembling beneath him, unable to support the weight. He made it halfway before collapsing gently back down, breath catching sharply. Wes stepped forward immediately. "Easy, easy!" But Adrian didn't move. He watched. Because there was something else in that moment. Something that didn't belong to physical recovery. Ranger didn't try to stand again. Instead, he shifted, dragging himself slightly, inch by inch, until he was facing Adrian. And then he stopped. Stayed there, breathing hard, looking at him, not asking, not reacting, positioning himself. As if, even in weakness, even in confusion, he understood something simple and absolute. That was where he needed to be. And for reasons Adrian couldn't explain, not logically, not cleanly, that mattered more than the attempt to stand. Elena had seen it too. She didn't comment right away. Instead, she adjusted the enclosure, checking Ranger again, listening longer this time. "He's orienting," she said quietly. Wes blinked. "Toward him?" Elena nodded once. "Toward something he recognizes." Adrian didn't respond, but something in his posture shifted again. Not outwardly, not enough for anyone else to name. But internally something moved, a line, perhaps, one he hadn't realized he was still holding. The rest of the day passed without incident. No dramatic improvement, no sudden setbacks. Just continuation. And sometimes, Adrian thought, continuation was the hardest part, because it required staying. Not reacting, not escaping, just being present long enough for something to change. By afternoon, the light outside had brightened slightly, reflecting off the snow in a way that made the town look almost clean again. Deceptively so. Inside, Ranger slept again, his body finally allowing deeper rest now that the immediate crisis had passed. Elena approached Adrian one last time, before stepping away to another task. "You can go," she said. Adrian looked at her. "He's stable for now. We'll call if anything changes." Adrian glanced at Ranger, then back at her. "I'll stay." Elena held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. I thought you might. She turned away without another word. Wes watched the exchange, then looked back at Adrian, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Guess you're not going anywhere, he said. Adrian didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long time, staying didn't feel like being stuck. It felt like a choice. And that was different. The second morning did not feel like the first. There was still cold outside. Still snow along the edges of the road. Still wind dragging its quiet voice across the town. But something had shifted, not in the weather, not in the buildings, but in the way the day unfolded. It moved, not faster, but with direction. Inside Maple Ridge Animal Care, the routine had settled into something almost predictable. Machines hummed, doors opened and closed, voices rose and fell in soft, controlled patterns. It was no longer the sharp urgency of survival, it was maintenance now. And maintenance, Adrian Cross knew, required a different kind of discipline. He stood near the enclosure, one hand resting lightly against the metal frame. His posture relaxed in a way that would have been unrecognizable just days earlier. Not careless. Never that. But less guarded. Ranger was awake. Not fully alert, not yet strong, but awake in a way that felt deliberate. His head rested against the bedding, lifted slightly higher than before. His eyes followed movement now, tracking the slow rhythm of the room, the shifting shapes of people and light. More importantly, he followed Adrian. Not constantly, not obsessively, but every time Adrian moved within his field of vision, Ranger adjusted, even slightly, to keep him there. Elena Ward noticed. Of course she did. She noticed everything. He's anchoring, she said quietly, stepping beside Adrian. He glanced at her. What does that mean? Elena folded her arms, watching Ranger with the same focused calm she brought to every assessment. It means he's choosing something to orient around, something stable. She paused, then added, That's usually the difference between animals that recover and those that don't. Adrian absorbed that without comment. He didn't ask what it meant. He understood. Wes Carter, who had been restocking supplies nearby, glanced over with interest. So basically, he said, leaning casually against the counter, you're his, what, compass? Elena gave him a look. Don't simplify things you don't understand. Wes raised his hands slightly in surrender, though a faint grin tugged at his mouth. Just saying, he watches you like you're the only thing in the room that makes sense. Adrian didn't respond, but his eyes shifted briefly toward Ranger. The dog's gaze met his immediately. Not intense, not demanding, just present. It was a strange thing, to be that for something else. Adrian turned away first. The morning continued. More animals came in. Routine visits, minor injuries, things that would have seemed urgent to their owners but barely registered in the quiet gravity of the treatment room. A woman entered mid-morning carrying a small terrier wrapped in a blanket. And she was in her late 50s, short and sturdy, with a face shaped by years of practical living rather than softness. Her gray hair was pulled back tightly, revealing a pair of sharp blue eyes that missed very little. Her name, spoken quickly at the counter, was Margaret Hale. She glanced at Adrian once as she passed. Not curious. Assessing. People in towns like this noticed things. They didn't always comment, but they noticed. Margaret's terrier yipped weakly as Elena examined it, the sound high and nervous, a stark contrast to the quiet endurance of the German Shepherd across the room. Wes moved between patients, his energy returning gradually as the day progressed, though the fatigue still lingered at the edges of his movements. Hey, he said at one point, nodding toward Ranger. He drank a little this morning. Adrian looked up. How much? Not much, Wes admitted. But it stayed down. That mattered, more than it should have. Adrian nodded once. Oh, good. It was the most he said. But Wes seemed to understand the weight behind it. Time passed again in that quiet, measured way. And slowly, subtly, the room began to shift around Adrian. People noticed, not in a loud way, not with questions or confrontation, just attention. The way someone stayed a second longer when passing by, the way a glance lingered before moving on, the way silence changed shape when he entered it. Adrian had spent years being invisible in places like this. Not because people didn't see him, because they chose not to. Men like him, quiet, controlled, distant, tended to be left alone. That had been fine, preferred even. Now it was different. He wasn't sure when that had changed. Maybe it hadn't. Maybe he had. It happened just after noon. The door to the clinic opened again, letting in a brief rush of cold air and the faint crunch of snow under boots. A man stepped inside. He didn't belong to the rhythm of the place. That was the first thing Adrian noticed. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. Tall, but not in a solid way, more stretched than built. His coat was dark, worn, but not from honest use. His hair was a dull brown, thinning slightly at the crown, and his face carried the kind of sharpness that came from calculation rather than experience. His eyes moved quickly. Too quickly. Not observing. Scanning. He didn't approach the counter right away. Instead, he looked around the room. Once. Twice. And then, his gaze landed on Ranger, and stayed there. Not with concern. Not with recognition. With something colder. Something that didn't belong in a place like this. Adrian felt it before he understood it. That shift. That tension. The kind that didn't come from memory, but from instinct. The man stepped forward finally, offering a brief, practiced smile to no one in particular. "Busy day?" he said casually. Elena glanced up from her work, her expression neutral. Can I help you?" The man shrugged slightly, his movements too loose, too controlled. "Just looking around," he said, "passing through." No one in Silver Pines just passed through. Not like that. Not in winter. Adrian didn't move, didn't speak, but his attention sharpened. The man's gaze flicked back to Ranger again, just for a second before he turned away. It was enough. Something in Adrian's chest tightened. Not memory this time. Recognition. Not of the man. Of the behavior. He had seen it before. Different places. Different contexts. But the same underlying truth. People who looked like that didn't look without reason. Wes stepped closer to the counter, his posture shifting subtly, though he likely didn't even realize it himself. "You need something?" he asked, tone friendly but firmer now. The man smiled again. "No, I'm good." He lingered a second longer, then turned and left. The door closed behind him, the bell chiming softly as if nothing had happened. A silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence. Elena watched the door for a moment longer than necessary. Then she went back to work. Wes exhaled quietly. "That was weird," he muttered. Adrian didn't respond. He was watching Ranger. The dog hadn't moved much, but his body had changed. Subtly. The muscles along his neck were tighter. His ears, though still weak, had shifted slightly backward. Not fear. Awareness. He had noticed, too. Of course he had. Adrian stepped closer to the enclosure, resting his hand lightly against the frame again. Ranger's eyes moved to him, held there. The tension eased, just slightly. That was all it took. Adrian exhaled slowly. Not everything that followed them was in the past. Some things were still moving. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident, but the moment lingered. Not loudly, not urgently, just there, a thread beneath everything else. Elena approached Adrian again near the end of the day. "You saw that," she said. Not a question. Adrian nodded once. "You know him?" she asked also. "No." "But you recognized something." Adrian met her gaze. "Yes." Elena held that for a moment, then nodded. "Then we pay attention." Simple, direct, no panic, no dismissal. Adrian appreciated that. He looked back at Ranger. The dog was resting again, his breathing steady, his body slowly reclaiming strength one small piece at a time. But his eyes opened once more. Just briefly. They met Adrian's, and held, as if confirming something unspoken. Adrian didn't look away this time. He stayed. Because whatever this had become, it wasn't just about survival anymore, and somewhere beneath the quiet routine of the clinic, beneath the steady rhythm of recovery, something else had begun to take shape. Something that hadn't finished revealing itself yet, but would. Soon enough. The night did not fall the way nights usually did. It did not arrive quietly, slipping into corners and softening edges. It pressed in, not with noise, with presence. Adrian Cross noticed it the moment he stepped outside Maple Ridge Animal Care. The air had changed, not colder, not sharper, but heavier. The kind of weight that settled into the lungs before the mind had time to name it. Snow lay across the street in pale, unbroken sheets, reflecting the last fragments of dusk. The town of Silver Pines held its usual posture. Still, contained, almost deceptively peaceful. But Adrian had lived too long reading environments to trust stillness at face value. He paused on the wooden steps, his boots crunching softly against packed frost. One hand rested near his side, not tense, not ready, just aware. Behind him, the clinic door opened. Elena Ward stepped out, pulling her coat tighter around her lean frame. The cold, brushed strands of her dark brown hair loose from the tie at her neck, curling faintly along her jawline. Her face, always composed, carried something sharper tonight. Not fear, but calculation. "You're thinking about him," she said. Not a question. Adrian didn't turn immediately. "Yes." Elena stepped beside him, following his line of sight toward the empty street. "You've seen that kind of man before," she added. "Yes." She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once. "Then don't ignore it." Adrian let out a slow breath. "I don't." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, not strained. Just deliberate. Inside the clinic, Ranger shifted. The faint scrape of movement reached Adrian through the door, subtle enough that most would have missed it. He didn't. He turned back, stepping inside without another word, and the warmth hit him again, familiar now, layered with antiseptic, worn wood, and the faint, persistent scent of animals fighting to stay alive. Ranger was awake, more than before. His body still lay low against the bedding, but his head lifted higher, his posture carrying something new, not strength, not yet, but intent. His eyes moved immediately to Adrian. Held. There was no hesitation in it now. No uncertainty. Just recognition. Adrian crouched beside the enclosure, lowering himself slowly, deliberately, as if approaching something that required respect rather than caution. "Easy," he said quietly. Ranger didn't move toward him. He didn't need to. The space between them felt smaller than it had been. Not physically. Something else. Wes Carter leaned against the counter nearby, arms crossed loosely, watching the exchange with a quiet kind of curiosity. "He's different tonight," Wes said. Adrian didn't look away from Ranger. "How?" Wes tilted his head slightly, considering. Like he's waiting for something." That landed. Adrian's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Dogs don't wait without reason," he said. Wes nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what I was thinking." Elena moved deeper into the room, checking supplies, adjusting a tray, her movements precise as always, but her attention drifted back more than once. Everyone felt it now. That subtle shift, like something had entered the story without announcing itself. And stayed. Hours passed. The clinic quieted as night settled fully outside. The steady rhythm of activity slowed, softened, narrowed into smaller tasks and longer silences. A clock ticked faintly somewhere near the reception desk. Machines hummed. Wind brushed softly against the windows. Adrian remained near Ranger, not constantly watching, not hovering, but present. There was a difference. Ranger dozed intermittently, his breathing steady, though still shallow at times. Each rise and fall of his chest carried less strain now, but not enough to forget how close he had been to losing that rhythm entirely. Adrian noticed everything. The slight twitch in the dog's ear when a sound shifted. The way his paws flexed faintly during sleep. The pauses between breaths, short but measurable. It was instinct, not worry, not anymore. Something deeper. It happened just past midnight. No noise announced it. No sudden movement. Just change. Ranger woke. Not gradually. Not like before. His eyes opened sharply, fully, as if something had called him from a place deeper than sleep. His body tensed, not violently, not in fear, but with a clarity that didn't belong to weakness. His head lifted higher than it had all day. His ears, though still not fully steady, angled forward. And then he looked past Adrian, not at him, through him, toward the door. Adrian turned slowly. The clinic entrance stood closed. Still. Nothing moved beyond it. No footsteps. No shadow under the frame. Nothing. But Ranger didn't look away. But a low sound formed in his throat. Not a growl, not quite a whine. Something in between. Something restrained. Awareness. Adrian stood. Every part of him sharpened at once. Not panic, alignment. He crossed the room in silence, each step controlled, measured. His hand brushed the edge of the door before he opened it. Cold air slipped inside immediately. The street outside lay empty. Snow unmoved. No tracks. No sign of anything. And yet, Adrian stepped out anyway. The night wrapped around him, quiet and endless, the kind of silence that swallowed sound rather than carried it. He scanned the road. Left, right. The buildings stood still, their windows dark or dimly lit. Nothing out of place. Nothing obvious. But instinct didn't care about obvious. Something had been here. Recently. Close enough. Long enough. Watching. Adrian stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Then turned back inside. Ranger had not moved, but his gaze shifted the moment Adrian returned. Locked onto him again. The tension eased. Only slightly. Enough. Adrian closed the door behind him. Elena stood a few feet away now, her expression tighter than before. "What did you see?" she asked. Adrian shook his head once. "Nothing." She held his gaze. "That doesn't mean there was nothing." "No," Adrian agreed quietly. "It doesn't." Wes exhaled from across the room, running a hand through his hair. "Okay," he muttered. "I officially don't like this anymore." No one responded. Because they all felt it. The shift, the presence of something unseen but not imagined. Ranger lowered his head slowly, his body easing back into the bedding but not fully relaxed. Not yet. Adrian returned to his place beside the enclosure, crouching again, one hand resting lightly against the metal frame. Ranger's eyes closed briefly, then opened again. Checking. Still there. Adrian stayed. Because leaving felt wrong. Not unsafe. Just incomplete. The night stretched on, longer than it should have. Every small sound carried weight now, the ticking clock, the soft hum of machines, the faint scrape of fabric as someone shifted position. Time didn't pass. It waited, and somewhere beneath it all, something had begun to move. Not toward them, not yet. But closer. By early morning, the tension had thinned, but not disappeared. It lingered in the corners of the room, in the quiet spaces between movement and stillness. Ranger slept again, though more lightly now. Adrian hadn't moved much. Elena approached him as the first gray light of dawn began to touch the edges of the windows. "You stayed up?" she said. "Yes." She studied him briefly. "You're not wrong about this," she added. Adrian looked up. "I know." Elena nodded once. "Then we prepare." Simple, direct, necessary. Wes yawned loudly from across the room, stretching as he stood. "I'm getting coffee," he said. "Strong enough to fight whatever ghost just walked through here?" Elena almost smiled. Almost. Adrian didn't. He was watching Ranger, because whatever had happened, whatever was coming, the dog had felt it first, and that meant something. It always did. Morning did not arrive all at once. It came in layers. First, the faint gray that softened the edges of the windows. Then the pale blue light that stretched slowly across the snow outside. And finally, the quiet sounds of a town waking, not loudly, not urgently, but steadily. Inside Maple Ridge Animal Care, the night still lingered. Not in darkness, in memory. Adrian Cross had not slept. He didn't need to check the clock to know how long he had been awake. His body tracked time differently through stillness, through the way his muscles settled into readiness instead of rest. He stood near the window now, arms relaxed at his sides, watching the street beyond. Nothing moved. Not yet. But the world had shifted again. He could feel it. Behind him, Ranger stirred. The sound was small, just the faint shift of weight against fabric. But Adrian turned immediately. The dog was awake. Fully awake. More than before. His head lifted higher than it had any right to, considering the condition he had been found in days ago. His body, though still lean, carried something new, not just recovery, but presence, awareness. His eyes moved across the room slowly, then settled on Adrian. Held. There was no hesitation anymore. No searching. Only recognition. Adrian stepped closer, lowering himself into a crouch beside the enclosure, his movements controlled, almost ritual-like in their consistency. "You're still here," he said quietly. Ranger's ears shifted forward, both of them now responding more evenly, though one still lagged slightly behind the other. The dog exhaled softly. Not weak, measured. Adrian watched the rise and fall of his chest. Steadier. Not perfect, but steady enough. Elena Ward entered from the back room, and carrying a clipboard and a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Her posture was the same straight, efficient, but there was something softer around the edges now. Something earned through long hours and quiet victories. "He made it through the night," she said. Adrian nodded once. "I know." Elena stopped beside him, following his gaze. "He's not out of it," she added. "But he's past the point where the body just gives up." Her words were clinical, but the weight behind them wasn't. Adrian absorbed that in silence. Wes Carter stumbled in a moment later, his hair a mess, his hoodie wrinkled, his expression somewhere between exhaustion and relief. "Okay," he muttered, rubbing his face. "If this is what winning looks like, I need a nap after every victory." Elena didn't look at him. "You'll get one when the next patient doesn't walk through the door." Wes sighed dramatically. "Cruel. Well, that's what that is." But his eyes moved to Ranger, and softened. "Hey, buddy," he said, quieter now. Ranger didn't respond the way a healthy dog might. No wagging tail. No attempt to rise. But his gaze flicked toward Wes. Acknowledging. That was enough. Time passed again, but it felt different now. Lighter. Not safe. But moving forward. Adrian stood eventually, stepping back just enough to stretch his legs, his eyes scanning the room without losing track of Ranger's position. Everything felt sharper after the night, not because something had happened, because something almost had. And that mattered. The clinic door opened mid-morning, the familiar chime cutting gently through the quiet. This time, it wasn't tension that entered. It was life. A young woman stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat as she closed the door behind her. She was in her early 30s, tall in a natural, unforced way, her posture straight but not rigid. Her dark blonde hair was tied loosely at the back, and strands falling around a face that carried both strength and fatigue. Her name, spoken at the counter, was Clara Bennett. She carried a cardboard box in both hands, careful, protective. Inside it, a small cat. Gray, thin, its fur uneven, its eyes wide but dull with exhaustion. Clara approached slowly, her movements deliberate, her voice calm but edged with concern. "I found her behind the grocery store," she said. "She wouldn't come out at first. Took me an hour." Elena nodded, stepping forward immediately. "Let's take a look." As they moved, Clara's eyes drifted. Not randomly. They landed on Ranger, and stayed. There was something in her expression, not surprise, not simple sympathy, but recognition. Not of the dog, of the situation. She had seen something like this before. People who carried that look always had. Adrian noticed. Of course he did. He noticed the way her shoulders shifted slightly, as if adjusting to something internal. The way her breath changed, the way her eyes softened, but not weakly, deliberately. She crouched slightly, keeping her distance, studying Ranger without intruding. "He's strong," she said quietly. Not a question. Adrian looked at her. "Yes." Clara nodded once, as if confirming something for herself. "They usually are," she added. That word usually carried history. Adrian didn't ask, not yet. It happened without warning. Ranger moved. Not a shift. not a twitch. He tried to stand. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't controlled, but it was intentional. His front legs pushed against the bedding, trembling under the strain. His body lifted just enough to break contact with the ground before faltering. Wes froze. "Elena!" "I see it." Elena was already moving, stepping closer but not touching, watching, measuring. "Easy," she said, her voice low, steady. Ranger didn't collapse. He adjusted, shifted his weight, tried again. This time he held it. Barely. But enough. His legs shook violently, his body uncertain, but upright, for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. He stood. Adrian didn't move, didn't speak, didn't interfere. Because something in that moment didn't belong to help. It belonged to the dog. Ranger's head turned slowly, not toward the room, toward Adrian. Always toward Adrian. Their eyes met, and in that fragile, impossible posture, something passed between them. Not trust. Not yet. Something deeper. Choice. Then Ranger's legs gave out. He lowered back onto the bedding, not collapsing, not falling, lowering. Controlled. Intentional. Elena exhaled quietly. "That's significant," she said. Wes let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Yeah, I'd say so." Clara stood still, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the counter, her gaze fixed on the dog. "He's fighting," she said. Adrian nodded once. "Yes." But his voice carried something else now, not just observation, understanding. Now the rest of the morning unfolded with a different kind of energy. Hope. Not loud, not overwhelming, but present. Ranger rested again, his breathing slightly deeper now, his body recovering from the effort. Elena made notes, her movements precise, but faster now, driven by something that wasn't urgency. It was momentum. Wes hovered nearby, checking, rechecking, pretending not to be emotionally invested while failing completely. Clara stayed longer than she needed to, not interfering, just present. At one point, she approached Adrian again. "You've done this before," she said. It wasn't about the dog, not entirely. Adrian looked at her. "Yes." She studied him for a moment, her eyes searching, not for answers, but for confirmation. Then she nodded. "So have I," she said quietly. She didn't explain, didn't need to. Some histories recognized each other without introduction. Adrian accepted that, because some things didn't need to be spoken to be understood. Outside, the town continued. Snow melted slowly along the edges of the road, and people moved. Life resumed its rhythm. Inside the clinic, something had been restored. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Adrian stood once more near the enclosure, his hand resting lightly against the metal frame. Ranger slept, but it was different now. Not the heavy, uncertain sleep of something slipping away. The steady, quiet rest of something returning. Adrian watched him for a long moment. Then, for the first time since stepping into this place, he allowed himself to breathe, not because the danger was gone, not because everything was safe, but because something had held, something had stayed. And sometimes, that was enough. There are moments in life that do not arrive with thunder, or light, or voices from the sky. They come quietly, almost unnoticed, like a wounded animal in the snow, or a tired heart that has forgotten how to hope. In this story, nothing looked like a miracle at first. It was just a man who chose not to walk away. A dog who refused to give up. A few people who stayed when it would have been easier to leave. But sometimes, that is exactly how God works. Not by removing the storm, but by placing something or someone in your path so you don't face it alone. The truth is, many of us are living through silent winters. Some are carrying grief. Some are exhausted. Some are one moment away from giving up, even if no one else can see it. And yet, in the middle of that quiet struggle, God still moves. Through kindness, through courage, or through the small decision to stop, to care, to stay. One life can change another. One act of compassion can ripple farther than we ever imagine. And sometimes, when we think we are saving something else, God is actually saving us. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, or what part of the story stayed with you the most. And if you believe that stories like this still matter, stories about hope, about second chances, about the quiet ways God works, please consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue bringing these stories to life. May God bless you and your family. May He strengthen you in your hardest moments, guide your steps when the path feels uncertain, and bring warmth into every cold place in your life. And may you never forget, even in the darkest winter, His light is still there.